tonight we are in Groundswell because I couldn't find any studio space locally. And Jess just happened to open the studio space here at Groundswell. So we are the very first to use this space. I want to thank you for that. It must be very exciting to launch this part of your business.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It's like, finally it's here. It was one of those things where when we first opened, I was like, oh, like it's a small little vault. It won't take much work to turn it into a studio. Like we'll just throw some lights in there and it'll be fine. And then once we got into it, I realized, okay, it's actually a lot of work because there's a lot you got to think about. First of all, when you walked in the door and spoke, it was extremely echoey. And so thank goodness my husband is a sound engineer. Like he used to work at the radio station. He knows about sound. So he immediately is thinking about sound dampening and microphones and how that's all going to work. And I was not thinking about any of that. So I slowly and reluctantly realized it was going to take longer than what I thought. But today we're here. It exists. And I call this phase 1. I mean, it's good enough to do a podcast, I think.
It worked very well for us.
Yeah. And so, and we're going to try some videos next and see how that looks and sounds. And then we'll just keep evolving it from here.
Well, that's good.
So, yeah.
Well, I wanted to thank you for letting us use this space, and I hope that we can come back and use it even more.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Well, good evening, everyone. We are back, and we have our next guest who is running for the Green Party here in Halderman, Norfolk, and it is Brooke Martin. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
So what led you to the Green Party?
So I never really planned on being a politician. It wasn't something that I grew up kind of aspiring to. I've always been interested in politics. I followed it like since civics class in grade 10. I've always been interested in it. The last election was actually a federal election. I was a Liberal voter. And then Justin Trudeau bought the pipeline, and then I was like, I don't know if that's the best way to use $4.5 billion taxpayers' dollars. So that kind of got me off the Liberals, and then I was considering voting NDP, and then there's a few things with their party that didn't really sit perfectly well with me. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to vote Green. I really looked into their policies. They sat well with me. And then there wasn't anyone running for the riding here, so I wanted someone to be on the ballot. So I was really originally just going to put my name in for the nomination process and see if there was someone else running. I'd maybe back out. And then I was thinking, even if someone else runs, I think that I'd be a good representative for the Green Party. I have a healthcare background. I'm a nurse at the hospital here in Simcoe. I've always been interested in sustainability and things like that. And I know quite a bit about sustainability, especially kind of local things like with Phragmites and ticks and all of that sort of environmental piece. So then I put my name in, and then it's been a whirlwind since.
It always is. I know when I became the NDP candidate, once that happens, it takes off like crazy.
Yeah.
So you mentioned some of your background, so why don't we go there? So where are you from originally?
So I lived between Simcoe and Delhi. I was originally in Walsh, but like for the first year of my life, and then since then I've been living between Simcoe and Delhi, just in a rural property on like 50 or so acres. So I've been very, very lucky. My parents actually boil maple syrup, and we'd have a big garden and stuff like that. So I've been really, really lucky, and I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to live in Norfolk County and be able to appreciate all the beautiful places to go. And I just bought a kayak, and it's just such a beautiful county, and as well as Haldeman, there's so many beautiful places to experience and so much culture here.
So you mentioned that you're a nurse.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you work?
I work at Norfolk General.
Okay. So
yeah, I work in the ER and ICU there, yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about that. So what led you to nursing?
My mom's a nurse, so she's an RPN, and I've just always been interested in healthcare. I've always been interested in biology, and then I've always wanted to do something that kind of helped people. So with my mom being a nurse, that kind of drew me that way. And then I haven't looked back. I love it. I love it so much. I like being able to help people, and especially in the ER and ICU, there's a big critical thinking piece and thinking on your feet and trying to kind of problem solve and figure out what's going on with the patient. And it's really, really good. And you can see I don't know, that kind of humanity piece too, being there for people and being supportive and helping people's families and stuff when they're going through tough times. It's really rewarding.
So where did you go to school for nursing?
Western University in London.
So you went to Western, you finished up degree there, and then did you immediately come home or did you?
Yeah, I went to Western, and then my consolidation, like my final placement, I did at Norfolk General in the ER and ICU. I originally wasn't planning to go in ER or ICU. I was thinking going into geriatrics. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for elderly people. But that was the only placement at Norfolk General that had a placement for me to go to. So I had to do ER and ICU, and then I've just loved it. Like I said, the critical thinking piece and everything else has been really, really nice. So I got an interview and everything while I was doing my placement, and then I was hired on as soon as I was registered. So I was really lucky, yeah.
That is really good.
Yeah.
So how do you feel? A lot of people talk about the fact that when they go away, then it's a hard time to come back. So you really did find a chance to come back.
Yeah. And I think that's like, it's a bit of a misconception. Like people say that there's not a lot for young people in Norfolk, and I think in Haldimand as well. I think that just we're not aware of it. You kind of have to go looking for things. Like I actually met Jess, the owner of Groundswell, very briefly at young entrepreneurs or something. The county was trying to get information about how to retain young people and stuff, and I actually ended up being sat at a table with her. And since then, so that was a part of Team Norfolk, so I was a part of those emails, and then from those emails I've got on a subscription to some other Norfolk emails, and there's a lot of local events that are great for people my age. Like I have a packed summer of different events, and so I think it's a bit of a misconception that there's not a lot. The only thing is the housing piece. That's the big thing that's missing in Haldimand, Norfolk, is affordable housing for young people. And I've been lucky enough to live with my parents, so that's kind of allowed me to stay here, but I totally understand that that's an issue.
So you kind of briefly touched on you were a Liberal voter, and then some of the decisions they made. So what is it about the Green Party that really attracted you to the party?
The main thing is that they just seem to make the most sense. Like their policies make sense. They're evidence-based. They go by science. They go by what has worked in other countries. And then also they use upstream thinking, which is something that I learned in nursing school as well. Basically, stop the problem before it's a problem, and it saves a lot of money. Like if you can invest in reduce poverty and stuff, then you're saving a lot of healthcare costs down the road because they're not able to eat healthy, they're not able to afford their medications, and it just kind of goes into a chronic problem that costs a lot more money down the road. If you're able to invest upstream, then the downstream costs are a lot less. So that's something that they go with a lot of issues, and that's kind of what's drawn me to them. Yeah.
So one of the platform pieces in 2005, I believe it was looking at debt reduction for students.
Right.
In your own case, were you facing a lot of student debt when you came out of
I
university?
had about $25,000 of student debt, which is quite a bit. Like again, I was lucky to live with my parents. They didn't charge me rent, so I was able to basically every penny that I made was just going right to my debt to pay off. There is some things like with healthcare. Luckily, they also have. I didn't get OSAP because my dad worked at OPG, so he had enough money that I didn't qualify for OSAP. But people that do, they do have at the hospital here, because it's considered a rural hospital. They do have kind of a debt forgiveness with that, which is something I think that's just in Ontario, and that's something that would be great, and it does work. Like there's at least 4 nurses that work in ER and ICU that are using that program, and maybe wouldn't be working at the rural hospital here if that didn't exist. So that is definitely something to look at to do on a federal level.
What are some of the other platform pieces? So we talked about debt forgiveness. We've talked a little bit about so we could go on to talk about the Green Party is well known for its CO2 level goals.
Right.
So what's your kind of take there?
So I think one thing that is a little bit different than the Green Party compared to the current carbon tax is that they want to do a carbon fee and dividend. So basically you get taxed, or the carbon gets taxed, and then that money that's taken from doing things that have high emissions goes right into a fund that goes back right to the Canadian taxpayer. It doesn't get put in with the federal funds at all. So then that kind of ensures that everyone's getting the money back that they've invested into it, and it also kind of helps people that are in poverty and stuff. They get some extra money that maybe they didn't end up spending on carbon, but it'll kind of help them get on their feet. Another big piece with the Green Party too is, like, a lot of people think that doing a carbon fee and dividend system will end up costing the economy, and I kind of disagree with that. I think that there's a lot of potential for economy with the Green Party's platform. So basically, they want to reduce things that have emissions, which again, that's kind of that upstream piece. If we reduce that now, then we save money already. There's so much cost down the line with ignoring this climate emergency that we're in, with the natural disasters, the health costs of bad air, bad water, all of those things. And then there's a lot of potential for job growth. So they want to look at making jobs and for sustainable energy, so solar, wind, hydro, tidal energy, all of those kind of pieces, that would create a lot of jobs. They want to invest in more high-speed light rail, which would create a lot of jobs. There's a lot of people in the auto sector that have been losing their jobs, and I think that's a good potential to really focus on electric vehicles, and especially vehicles that are kind of federal, like Canada Post. We could start a contract with electric vehicle manufacturer to get all Canadian Post vehicles electric, which would kind of help get that system going. And also a lot of trades jobs in retrofitting homes and making them more efficient, and as well as creating Canadian-made products that can be used to make houses more efficient. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential to grow the economy with the green plan. We just have to kind of change where people are working, and they want to help provide funding for people that are working in the oil sector to help them get into a sector that is more renewable, is more sustainable long term.
So you look at the 2005 platform, they had a 40% reduction to go below 40% below the 2005 levels, and they wanted to hit that by 2025. And then they wanted 80% reduction by 1990 over the 1990 levels, and they want that by 2050. Given the current state of climate change as you perceive it, and a lot of the stuff that's coming out now, do you think that those are still sustainable goals, or do you think that those should be accelerated?
That's a little bit over my head. I do think that one piece that kind of people forget as well is, like, we think that we have to reduce our emissions and stuff like that, but we also waste a lot of emissions. Like, think of how many people leave the lights on at home, leave the TV on, how many people wouldn't use a vehicle if they had better public transport. Things like that are kind of just easy, common sense ways that we can reduce the emissions that we are already producing. I do think that it needs to be a huge focus, and I think there needs to be more kind of research and investment to get us down as low as we can be. And like I said, that's such a huge cost for healthcare and happiness as well. Like, if we keep getting making our air pollution, making our water. Canadians really love our outdoor spaces. Like, we like them. We really enjoy it. That's a huge cause of Canadian happiness. So I'd hate for things to keep getting worse and worse and worse, and us to not be able to enjoy those things long term.
Earlier you talked about affordable housing. What kind of solutions do you see there?
So I think and kind of Norfolk County Council is kind of looking at it as well. So kind of tiny houses, laneway houses, things like that. I'm actually, if they do approve it in Norfolk, I'm looking at possibly building one in my parents' backyard because they have quite a bit of acreage. Yeah. So I think things like that, kind of innovative solutions like that are good going forward. Like, it's worked in BC, it's worked in a lot of places in the U.S., and it's an affordable way for younger people to move forward. And I think there's a big movement kind of in simple living and getting back to the roots of what causes us to be happy. And people are kind of realizing that we don't need these huge 3-bedroom houses when we're just starting out. Like, I don't need that much space, and it's more space to clean and more space to maintain. I'd be fine with 1,000 square feet, 600 square feet. Like, that would be totally fine with me. And then that's another sustainability thing as well. Now you're not paying to heat and cool that whole space. So I think that's a really good way looking forward. And then also they want to look and so developers have to provide a certain percentage of what they're going to develop. So let's say they buy a subdivision, they have to say a portion of that has to be low-income housing. And I think that's a good way to move forward to ensure that we're not leaving people behind.
Well, one of the things that has often been noticed is that when you have mixed housing, so you have high, medium, and low mixed together, that as works better than a segregation into.
Right.
So, in your opinion, how can you see that playing out here in Norfolk County?
I think it would work amazing. Like, I think as a county, there's so many great people in Haldeman, Norfolk. Like, it's an amazing place to live. Like, you meet people, they're friendly. It's so different than going to Toronto or something like that, where everyone's just walking down the sidewalk and no one makes eye contact with you. Everyone here is so friendly. It's so easy to make conversation, and people, I think, want everyone to be on the same level. They don't want people to be living in poverty and being addicted to drugs and things like that. They want us all to be on the same level and for us all to kind of move together.
Well, kind of branching into that,
Yes.
Norfolk County has had quite the opioid
Right.
issue.
Right.
Do you know if the Green Party has a plan federally to start to look at that? I know that there's, well, if you look at other jurisdictions in the United States, some of the local governments and state governments are going after big big pharma companies for harm that is caused in society. What's the Green plan?
I don't know specifically what, I don't think their full platform is out yet. I can speak to what I would go for. And again, this is kind of speaking to one of the reasons I love the Green Party is that there's no whipped votes, meaning that I'm fully accountable to my constituents. I have no pressure to vote exactly the way the Green Party wants. So if my constituents disagree with a way that they're going, I will support them. But I think that is something, there is evidence that Big Pharma was aware of how addicted opioids were, and they kind of hid that. So I think that there is potential for a lawsuit against them for harms that they have caused by that. I think another piece is also, I believe that a lot of fentanyl, I can't think of the word, lab-made fentanyl or whatever is coming from China, and I think that's something that we need to look at too, is reducing the amount that's coming in illegally. So I think that's something that we need to deal with the Chinese government, and then also deal with at our customs to be able to find ways to detect that and stop it from coming in, because I think a lot of what's on the street now is coming in from China and isn't things that are prescribed and being misused.
Well, one of the things that's kind of happening along that regard is that there's this conversation happening that doctors don't want to prescribe it, so then they're cutting people off, and then they turn to street drugs.
Right.
That kind of enters into the whole mix of the affordability of medicines.
Right.
In transgender way.
Right.
One thing that the Green Party talks about is a national pharmacare plan. You coming from the health background, what do you feel about that?
I think that's totally necessary. I get patients, especially diabetics, that cannot afford their insulin or cannot afford to keep up with the things that they need to do to keep their insulin levels, keep their sugars within a normal range. So I think that is definitely something that we need to look at. And I think that there's potential to save a lot of money by using kind of the total population of Canada to get low rates from pharmacare companies. So I think that is something that we should definitely look at. And then there's also a big piece of how many things that we aren't aware of yet that could work, like for example, marijuana and stuff for pain relief, like you were speaking about. There's such a huge potential there that we aren't even fully aware of because we haven't been putting the research in there. And that's such a cheap solution. That's so much cheaper than opioids and everything else, and there's so many less side effects. There's not the constipation, there's not as much of the drowsiness, depending on the strain and the amount of THC and CBD and all of that. So that's definitely something to look forward to. And then as well, there's how many other things are not even aware of that are in nature that we aren't even sure about yet. Like how many things are in the Amazon rainforest, how many technologies and how many possible medicines are in there, how many things are in the coral reefs. And we might not know that if we don't stop this climate change thing now, those things could be gone forever and we'll never be able to gain anything from them. So I think that's definitely something to look forward to for nature solutions to a lot of healthcare problems that we have.
So kind of touching on that, the green climate change part, as you try to transition the economy from kind of where we're at today, how do you see it transitioning to like the green ideal, if you will?
So I think it's again kind of that upstream sort of thinking. We might have to invest a little bit of money up front to get people to where they need to be. Like for example, Indigenous populations are often a lot below the poverty line, and that's kind of been on the federal government. That's a part of their treaty, is that we should be providing them with safe drinking water and healthcare and housing and all of that, and we've kind of failed on that. And there's a lot of potential if we kind of get them up and get them to be part of the workforce. That alone will increase a lot of potential money that we can use, and taxpayers' money that we could use for our ideas.
In there, you talked about Indigenous populations.
Right.
One thing that's been a long outstanding issue is the Indian Act.
Yes.
And how First Nations, and also you look, so there's First Nations, there would be Six Nations, how they govern themselves and how they move forward. When you look at the Green Party, where does the Green Party stand on relationships with First Nations, relationships with Six Nations, relationships with Indigenous populations?
I think we have a lot of progress that needs to be made with those populations. I think, and especially the Green Party, I've been following people on Twitter and stuff that are running for the Green Party, and a lot of them are Indigenous leaders. So that alone, having them sit at the table will solve a lot of problems. The Green Party also wants to look at possibly repealing the Indian Act, which I think is the name alone says how old of an act, like it needs to be changed. We need to sit down with Indigenous leaders and people that advocate for that population and really come together and actually collaborate and not just say this is the way it's going to be, like it or not. Collaborate and listen to their input and put something forward that works for everyone. And then also, I think that it's necessary for reconciliation to admit that there has been a genocide on Canadian soil. Like I have a quote here. Actually, I've been reading a book called All Our Relations, and I actually think that it should be part of like the curriculum because there's so many things in there that I didn't realize. History of Indigenous populations in Canada and abroad that I wasn't aware of. So there's a quote here. So in 1907, the chief medical officer visited residential schools and found them to be overcrowded, unsanitary, and poorly ventilated, which is not very good because tuberculosis was on the rise then, and those things are not good for that. So he spoke to the superintendent of Indian Affairs at the time, who refused requests for aids. And then this is a quote from that superintendent. "It is readily acknowledged that the Indian children lose their natural resistance to illness by habituation so closely in residential schools, and that they die at a much higher rate than in their villages. But this does not justify a change in the policy of this department, which is geared towards a final solution of our Indian problem." Like that alone, that was shocking. And I think to move forward, I think we do need to admit our past and how kind of horrible it has been to be able to move forward. I know that our generation wasn't involved in that, but it's affected them for generations. Like residential schools has caused Indigenous leaders and people in their society to become depressed, to become reliant on drugs, to be able to numb the pain that they experience. So that's become a generational issue because now those parents are parents of the next generation and they see their parents go through that. And then so the increase, and then they become suicidal, and it's just been like snowballing. So we need to stop it, and we need to move forward and admit the faults that we've made in the past.
Yeah, another good book on that is Shinwalk's Vision.
Okay.
It talks about the history of Canada and how we started with the French, the English, and then kind of moving into a modern time 60s scoop.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one to tackle. And I know that it's always been quite controversial.
Yeah. I think, though, we really haven't actually sat them at the table and we've said that we've consulted with them, but really we listen to them and then kind of throw it away. We haven't actually consulted them in a 50-50 way where what they think is important, we think is important. So I think that's something that we need to look for.
Yeah, I was listening to a Harvard policy podcast, and they were talking about, in the United States, we're talking about slavery. And one thing they were talking about is the span of influence that an event like this has. Mm-hmm. And so in Africa, 400 years later, the region where lots of slaves were taken from are deeply afraid of strangers. Mm. And then also if you look in the United States, where slavery was, children who come from Black heritage are far under the white students in terms of their academic abilities.
Right.
And the one lady was saying there's about a 150-year gap because someone can live for 75 years and they interact with somebody else.
Right.
And some of that history gets passed on and carried forward.
Right.
So we're not all that far away from some of the things that have happened.
We're like 2-3 generations from people that have lived in residential schools, and the abuses that occurred in them are just horrendous. Like, it's heartbreaking listening to those stories. So I totally understand. Like, I think we need to be a lot more understanding from Indigenous populations. Like, they have been through a lot. Like, we have ruined their culture systematically. Like, we need to help them, and we need to invest in them to bring them up to our standard of living, first of all. Make sure they have clean water, make sure they have good housing, make sure they're able to do things that are culturally important to them, make sure they're able to speak their language. All those things are important for them to know who they are and for them to be able to contribute to society.
Well, one thing that's interesting is the schools on most reserves are run federally. What's your opinion there? Do you think that the schooling system should be handed back to Indigenous populations? Do you think there is a change that needs to happen within the funding model? Do you think there's a change in how we deliver education? And how do you, I know there's a lot of questions, but how do you make it so that the First Nations, or even like say Six Nations, can direct their own history and their own path forward?
So I think that's really important. I think that we need to, again, consult with them and see what's going to work for them, for the communities that feel they have the wherewithal to provide their own education and their own systems, as long as it meets like normal curriculum, like kind of like if you were to have someone homeschooled, as long as it still meets the federal curriculum. I don't see a problem with that whatsoever. I think it's definitely something that we should look towards. You had another question in there.
Basically, my premise is, you look at, say, Six Nations, and you look per capita, it has a disproportional amount of PhD level of education.
Right.
They are extremely knowledgeable about their own history, about their own culture, about their own identity. What has happened in the past is Canadians basically stepped in and said, this is what we believe you need to do. At what point do we kind of try to reverse that and say, you are the masters of your own destiny, you know yourselves best, the people who know best for Six Nations are people from Six Nations. In your opinion, how do you begin to transition towards that?
So I think one thing is definitely to get them involved as much as they can in their own communities. So reducing kind of especially with child welfare and stuff like that, I think we need to help kind of get people mental health treatment and addictions treatment to get them back on their feet, because that seems to be the main reason that we're taking children from them, and that's kind of isolating them, and they're not able to pass that culture down again. So I think that's something we need to do. And then I think also we need to increase the amount of, like I mentioned with that book, things like that should be a part of the curriculum. Like, people in high school should be aware of the depth of that part of our history, because it is something that is important. It is something that it helps us understand where they're coming from, that they've been through trauma, they've been through abuses from the government that now they have to trust. And we keep saying, well, they just need to trust us, they just need to, here, we're giving them this money, they're not using it. We've never given them a reason to trust us. Like, they shouldn't trust us. We need to prove ourselves. We need to prove that we're there for them and that we're listening to them.
So we live in a very agricultural riding. What's the Green Party's plan for agriculture?
So one thing, I'm also reading a book about that as well. I love learning. So one thing kind of is we need to get rid of agrochemicals and kind of the big corporations that are taking over agriculture, and go back to small and medium-sized family farms. I think that's the way. They're proven to be as productive, if not more productive, as bigger farms. They're and then also looking towards sustainability in agriculture. So doing things like organic permaculture, using things like cover crops to reduce soil erosion, and as well as to provide green manure, it's called. So basically, like things like legumes and stuff like that help provide natural nitrogen and things like that to the soil. Things like that save farmers money, because they're not spending money on fertilizers and pesticides and stuff like that. So kind of the whole idea is working with nature rather than against it. And it's been proven time and time again that you get more production for less costs that way. So I think that's a big move forward. And then, that employs more people. Having family-run agriculture and stuff, it keeps more money in the local economy. So I think that's kind of the way forward on that. I think, especially in this riding, that's really important.
A very prominent issue in this modern age is the issue of mental health. What kind of things do you see that we should be doing there?
So there needs to be a lot more investment. I work in the emergency room, so we are kind of the first contact for a lot of people going through mental health crises, and it's unfortunately a bit of a revolving door. We see the same people over and over again. I've had people that are suicidal that were just discharged from a mental health hospital a couple of days earlier. So the system is failing. It's not working for Canadians. It's leading us to opioid addiction and other drug addiction to try to numb that pain and try to feel normal again. People are self-medicating. So it's a big failure on the system. We need to invest in that. We need to be open to different solutions. We need to look at what has worked in other countries. And we need to reduce the stigma. Like, so many people have been through, had mental health issues. And I think that's something that we really, really need to be focusing on, because it's such a reduction of such an issue with like getting people to go to work and stuff like that. If we can invest in that and get people to be productive and not feel those stressors, I think that's really important.
So when you look at the Green Platform, what things do they talk about there?
I don't think they have anything specific out yet. I think something that we need to maybe look at is definitely, and especially younger people. Like, there is younger people that are more experiencing mental health more than they have in the past. So I think that we need to get more doctors and nurses that focus in psychiatry and kind of mental health and stuff like that, as well as having things kind of in the community, like having the municipality a little bit more involved. And that's something that's something the Green Party wants to work at as well, is that municipalities are kind of underfunded. A lot of funding goes to federal and a lot of funding goes to municipal or to provincial. I think municipalities get like 8% of the funding, and that's the point of government that most people experience. Most people experience where they get their water, their sewage, their road cleared.
Experience it more directly.
Exactly. So I think that's something that they want to look forward. And then especially there's so many different cultures in Canada. I think it would be good to have municipalities more involved and have them properly funded to be able to provide things like that that'll work for their constituents the best.
We live in this environment now with populism, and there really seems to be a fracturing of society in North America, I would say, and even internationally. One of the things that you really see, say, in the United States is this really hard shift from left to right. And I think that in part you're beginning to see some of that coming to Canada. In your own opinion, what do you think can be done about that to try to bring us together versus this populist movement, which seems to be trying to wedge people apart?
Yeah, so I think that's a huge issue in federal government and provincial government as well. And I think that's something that I also really appreciate with the Green Party, is that they want to get rid of kind of partisan politics. We're all elected to represent our constituents and do the best that we can to make a better Canada for everyone. So it's kind of us versus them mentality, and during question period, yelling and banging on the table, it's just a waste of everyone's time. You're wasting taxpayers' money. You're not being productive. You're not getting things passed. So that's kind of why I like the Green Party's campaign slogan, not left, not right, but forward together. So it kind of gets rid of that kind of partisan issue. And if someone has a good idea, let's move with it. It doesn't matter if it's a conservative idea or a liberal idea or an NDP idea or a green idea. As long as it's a good idea and it'll help the Canadian people, let's go with it. Let's all collaborate and let's do what we're elected to do. Again, we're not there to make political parties more powerful. We're there to help everyone in Canada have a prosperous and enjoyable life.
Working in politics, I love the sentiment. I can tell you that from what I've seen in politics, this is going to be a hard road to hoe, that one is.
Right. And I think something, too, like, again, that federal government can learn from municipalities is, like, you watch the Norfolk Council or something. Right. They are so respectful. They are very polite. They follow like a order of way things are done, the way they speak together. There's rules. I think that they get punished somehow, like a fine or something, if they break those rules. And also, they have to balance the budget. They're not allowed to go into debt. So I think that's something that we need to look forward to. I think that there should be laws passed to kind of get rid of that yelling and kind of silliness that happens. I think it's a waste of everyone's time. I don't think they're representing Canada very well by doing that. So I think by introducing, and I can't see anyone fighting for a law. Like, I can't see them going to their constituents and being like, I didn't vote for this law for me to be a respectable politician because I wanted to yell and scream. Like, that just seems silly.
Yeah. So building off of that, one of the things that often led to a lot of disengagement for a lot of voters is this idea of transparency. So how do you think that a party or your party could be more transparent or could bring about a greater sense of transparency? I think that's really important in this day and age.
Yeah, it is very important. So one thing that also kind of got me into the Green Party when I was deciding kind of where I was going to vote and then eventually led me to run for the Green Party was the MPP in Guelph, Mike Schreiner, I think his name is. He, on Twitter and on Facebook, every single time he votes, he writes on there what way he voted and the rationale behind it, and he interacts with people in the comments. I think that is so important. That's something that I want to, if I am elected, something I want to bring to, because that gets people involved. They know what's going on in the government. You get automatic feedback about what your constituents like, and they're more informed. And I think that's really important. And then also the Green Party wants to make government documents more transparent and more easily able to be studied by data. So they want to be able, as long as there's not an kind of a privacy issue, they want to basically put every government document online for people to be able to read and understand and know kind of what they're getting into. And then also another thing with transparency is we've kind of gotten away from town halls. Like Justin Trudeau will do one every now and then, but like our actual MPs aren't doing that. Like Dianne Finlay, you see her maybe twice a year in a parade, and that's really it. You're not able to really speak to her. She doesn't have that kind of accountability piece where a large group of people can get together and ask questions. So that's something also that if I'm elected, I really want to look at having twice a year or quarterly or something like that to get people together and to be able to have a conversation and see what's working and what's not working moving forward.
That would be interesting. I don't think that's happened around here in quite some time.
No, I've not heard of it happening from my whole life, but I haven't been interested in so much politics before high school, so I don't know, but I don't think that it's been occurring.
So what's the game plan going forward? So you've been announced, you're getting ready to gear up. When do you see yourself kicking everything off?
So right now I'm just focusing on summarizing Vision Green, it's called. So that's 145 pages. I've got that summarized down into about 25. I want it summarized a little bit more just so people are fully aware of the platform that the Green Party is running off of, because we are more than just about climate change and stuff like that. They do have a very progressive, very forward-thinking platform that I think will work for a lot of Canadians. So that's kind of what I'm working towards. And then fundraising, I need to get that going. I need to buy signs, and I'm looking actually at collaborating with the co-owner of Groundswell here to work on a promo video possibly, and different campaign materials like that. So that's kind of where I'm moving forward, yeah. And then hopefully I'm going to try to get around and start door knocking hopefully in a week or two. I want to knock on as many doors and speak face-to-face with people as much as possible.
That's where the ground game is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know when I ran for the NDP, that's where a majority of my time was, out there meeting people, talking about the issues.
Yeah.
That's where you really get to feel of where people are and how they feel about things.
Yeah, and especially for the Green Party, because like I said, I don't think a lot of people are informed about really what they stand for. So I think like talking to people, I usually can. I've never been able to not find common ground with people about what my opinions are. My opinions do meet very well with the Green Party. So I think that there is ways to move forward and ways to get people to kind of get away from this us versus them, and let's just move forward together.
All right. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Not that I can think of.
Well, I can tell you that just from my own perspective, you got the summaries down pretty good. Like,
Thank you.
A lot of some of the interviews I've done, they go quite a long time talking about one issue. But like, we're at 40 minutes, but we've covered an immense amount of ground, which normally I don't get to do. Like, is there one thing that's absolutely near and dear to you that you want to talk about?
More just like climate change. That's the main thing. That is what's kind of drawn me to them. I just never really took them seriously before. I did kind of think they were just a one issue party. Like I didn't know really how they stood on other things. And then I looked at them like, oh, like I like them.
Well, that's, to me, I'm a moderate, right? And when I look around within the political landscape, you're finding more and more people are drifting to extremes. So when I ran for the NDP originally, I liked it because we were under Tom Mulcair and he was a moderate. Now, some people didn't like that because they thought they were too aligned to the Liberals, but I think that the Liberals and the NDP are fighting on the left space. And I look at the Conservatives and I say, well, you say you're not spending a bunch of money, but you are spending a bunch of money.
Yeah, well, I didn't realize either that Stephen Harper was given a surplus. And then we've had a deficit since then. He once had, this last year of election or whatever, got a bit of a surplus but he was given quite a big surplus. So I don't see how Conservatives can say that we're fiscally conservative when you're electing people like him who we were in a deficit for almost his whole election.
So then I kind of look at the NDP, the Green space, and I kind of say I kind of like it because it seems more moderate and it seems like the general approach.
It's common sense. It's common sense. It's spending money on things that we'll get a good return on investment on, and reducing funding for things like oil and gas and stuff that's going to cost us down the road. So it just makes sense to me. And I think once I speak to people and kind of get that idea across, I can kind of pull people. And especially it's nice that like we're not kind of, NDP is kind of more on the liberal side, of course, than the conservative side a bit. And it's kind of nice being a Green because it is common sense. So you can pull people from every different things because everyone has kind of the same ideas of what a good government is. And I think the Green Party really stands for that.
Okay, so we're out of time. It was great having you in the studio, and I look forward to seeing the campaign unfold. So thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right.